We are on episode 4. Today we have a special guest here with us, Mr.
No Wendy's, baby.
Seth. Also, believe it or not, this is a full Fleet Feet episode, but Seth did not overlap with Mike, just with myself, and he was also in the sports psych program with me down at Florida State. Um, Seth, you recently were accepted. Congratulations with that as well. Up at a program in Canada, made the move up there, and have very much enjoyed the move to Canada. Besides for the price, but from what I hear, you have a pretty interesting thesis topic here. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. First, thank you all for having me, including you, Nat. I know as much as you don't want to be in the spotlight, we're going to make you in the spotlight. But yes, so a little bit about me, which is a little bit about this topic, is that I'm really interested in groups in general, but specifically cross country and track and field. Similar to these guys, I think we all are interested in those two sports.
Yeah.
But my thesis topic and the quote that kind of leads the title is "Run for something bigger than yourself," which is interesting, at least to me, in two sports that are technically considered individual sport teams, which on the surface doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, how can individual sports also be teams? But really what that means is that they're individual in the way of, like, I don't require someone else in order to complete the sport. It's not like basketball. Like, you have to pass to your teammate. Football, you have to throw to a wide receiver or hand it off to a running back or something like that. In cross country, you're all just running. You just happen to be doing it at the same time. In most track events, you're running by yourself, you're jumping by yourself, other than obviously relays where you're passing a baton. But one thing that I found within my data, which was group interviews with people that compete in both cross country and track and field, is that it's particularly in cross country, people are gathered around from a team goal. Like, we want to win a national championship, we want a podium at nationals, and that is like the driving force of everything that they do in cross country. The 6 a.m. practices in September, all the way up to that national meet, if they are lucky enough to make it there. Now, in track, it seems to be a little bit different. Everyone just seems to be a little bit more individual about themselves. But in cross country, we have this team goal. And why is that? It's running for something bigger than yourself, not only this team goal, but the athlete or your teammates that you've been training with all year. People have put in so much effort that don't even get to race, or most of them, at the national meet. They're doing it for something bigger than just their own individual performance, which I think has a lot of implications other than just sport, but also just out in the world. One thing, if I could bring this up before we bring it out to a group discussion, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's from the World Championships. Just this one just happened a couple days ago, but it was Sha'Carri Richardson won the gold medal at the World Championships, and she had this quote after her race. I think it was a larger context. I think she had more than just what I had written down here, but I thought it was interesting. It's always been my time, but now it is my time to actually do it for myself and the people that felt like me, the people that look like me, and the people that know the truth about themselves as well. I represent those people. And the reason why I want to bring this up is there's a lot of people that you're representing. And this is the military thing that I wanted to bring up here. Was in the military, a lot of people are underpaid. Both my parents, my mom and my dad, they were in the military. They're career military people. And almost every single job in the military, you can get paid exponentially more if you are doing it out in the civilian world.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of leaders in the military say is the reason why you're staying in the military and doing this work that you're getting extremely underpaid for is that you're doing it for the love of your country. And a lot of times it's like, that's a lot of people. If you're doing it for your country, that's, in the case of the United States, 330 million people that you're doing it for. So at what point might that be a benefit to you, but also something that can hurt you in the long term or not?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to say. Now let's bring it out to a group discussion.
Yeah, the first thing to me, and I'll bring Mike in for this actually, is for those listening who don't understand like the differences between cross country and track team wise. Mike, I think most of us would agree that cross country feels a little bit more like that team sport. But what are the differences in scoring and performance, and kind of what training looks like for a track team versus a cross country team?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty spot on for the most part. It depends on who you ask. If you ask a track athlete, if it's a more team oriented sport than cross country, they might say, yeah. If you ask cross country, goes one way or the other. But with cross country in particular, you race 7 athletes, top 5 athletes score points for you, and you're competing against however many other teams, programs, top 7 athletes or 5 scores. Team with the lowest score wins. You get to the line first, you get a lower score, depending on where you fall, I guess where you finish amongst everybody else. Track and field in particular, though, same but similar here. You have, I can't remember how many events on the men and women's side. Is it 17 total? I think I will have to fact check that. I can't remember how many events are on the men and women's side here, but either way, so each event is scored 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I believe. 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, that's right. So, and in track, the higher the score, the more points you score. That's how you capture the championship. So, cross country, lower score, track, higher score. Totaling all the event points in track and field is where you get that score from. Just to kind of give that background for the listeners. So,
if I could add something here too, that makes it even more interesting in track and field is that it's such a diversity of events. And one thing that the people in my study said is that you can't have the people that throw javelin training in the middle of the track while the distance throwers, the sprinters, are training on the track. So that's a safety hazard, So a lot of these athletes, even though, hey, I'm a member of the track team as well as Mike is, if I'm throwing javelin, I practice at 10 o'clock while Mike is on the track at 3 o'clock or something like that. So we might not even see each other very often, even though we're on the same team. Whereas in cross country, everyone's doing the same thing. We're all training for the 10K or whatever it is.
And I think you see that socially as well. I mean, most track teams, right? The cross country team, if you think about like your freshman year when you come in, if you're a cross country recruit, you go with the other cross country recruits and you have fall practice and you guys get to know each other and kind of build those bonds. Yeah. And you get a full season in before track starts. And so when track starts, most often the distance guys, the mid distance guys, and maybe a couple of the sprinters already have a pretty solid bond with each other. And the rest of the team, maybe they start in October for fall practices, but for the most part, the NCAA doesn't allow much earlier than that outside of captains practices, which are hit or miss with attendance. And so you're coming in with a stronger bond. And to your point, there's a lot of events in track. So the teams practice different. I mean, you got your long D, you got your middle distance, you got your sprinters, you got your hurdlers, you got your throwers, you got your jumpers, you got your pole vaulters if they're separate from the jumpers. And even the jumps can be separated in terms of like who's practicing with who, depending on what team we're talking about. Right. And so that's a lot of different groups. And so how close is each group to the next and how much, interconnection is there? I think that depends on the university, to be completely honest. But I think that also the track emphasizes more of a similar relationship to what you mentioned with the military. Like there's a lot of different jobs in the military and those groups might be more tightly knit, but there are a lot of jobs. To me, cross country is the tightest because it's a smaller team and you have the same event. Everybody's running the same event, right? Which is that cross country race. And so you're a little bit closer, you're training for the same thing and everybody's at that practice. 100% of those people are training for that event. And that's an interesting dynamic, I think, when we take into account like the run for something bigger than yourself, right? Is, well, how close am I to the people who are doing the same thing that I am?
Yeah. And I mean, I want to add on that real fast. Even though we're talking about these two things, cross country and track and field, as two different ideas, they still fit together like a puzzle piece. Because when you talk about programs and which ones, how they organize practice, what schedules are like, competition, when you travel, closer knit groups, all those things. When you look at the best programs, though, and I'm sure this is very, very similar to the military, you're able to take those two groups, or if you want to call them two different groups, because it's all a part of the same program, all a part of the same team, and you make them fit together. When you look at the points that they score in track and field, a lot of times you can't win a conference championship, a national title, without having at least some crossover and having both sides. It is very, very rare. So, and I think probably one of the rarest but most known programs, and I hate to say it, University of Florida. They are good. They are good, and they have a decent balance. I would say their sprinters and jumpers probably carry them a bit more, but they still have some mix. They still get people who qualify for that national meet, who show up, who compete, who are at least in the running for points. And if they're not scoring points, they might be displacing points from other teams, helping them just kind of keep the buffer that they've built. So again, like you take these two different entities in theory, bring them together, and hopefully they still fit together like a puzzle piece, like to create a quality in a good program for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that might not be completely apparent, but in meets you can kind of exploit certain teams' weaknesses and strengths based with how you match up against them, right? Like similar in football, if you have an advantage on the defensive backs with your offense, that might favor you, even though that team might beat 9 out of 10 other teams. Or like in soccer, right? If you can really counterattack well and withhold pressure, even if that team has a really high octane offense that picks apart 9 out of 10 other teams, you might be able to do well, right? Like if your jumps stack up in the right way and your middle distance stacks up in the right way, you might still be able to win the meet just because you had enough of a gap in those two regions. And so that's really big on a kind of comparison margin when we talk about scoring. I think that there's a couple different directions that I want to go. What I want to start with is actually, so Seth was at Adams State, which is a pretty high octane program, especially in cross country, but in track and field as well. Similar to like Mike had mentioned, the Gators, unfortunately, as a Seminole, all three of us. But Adams State.
To bring them up anymore, okay? We don't have to mention that team anymore. We can let it go now.
Yeah, that's the last one. Yeah. Here on out, just Auburn references for the SEC. Even though the track team might not be the best example, they have gotten a lot better. Adams State. Seth, I wanted to ask you, with that standard of kind of high performance, how do you think that plays into this idea of like a we over me? I would say that their efficacy is high. Their kind of belief in themselves is pretty high, and they have results in the past to prove it. Do you think that plays a role in the we over me, or do you think that there's other factors kind of going on that you would look to?
I think there are a lot of factors, and one of them being with anything. This isn't just in cross country or like individual sport teams, but also just broadly like football. Even is how the coach approaches the sport. So the coach. Now, another thing that I think is undervalued but extremely important is the environment, and not just like who you spend time with, but even just like the city that you live in. Where Alamosa is extremely tiny, like literally 12,000 people. The nearest town, if I'm not mistaken, from Alamosa is like 15 miles away. And in between, it's just potato fields. So there's not a whole lot to do. It's like on Fridays, even though, team rule can't drink, on Fridays, it's like all you have are your teammates. There's literally nothing else going on. Right. So you just spend so much time with your teammates. And by spending so much time with those people that you already train with, like you're literally just 24/7 around those people, you start to build bonds, not only as teammates, but also just socially. Like you're my friend, not only my teammate. Yeah. And I think that goes a long way. Now, this is in a different study also, or not, well, it's not a study, but it was also with Adams State. And I guess should I bring this up? It's so puzzle pieces. I think I've talked to Nick about this before.
Yeah.
But man, is that going to be too long? Or should I just say it? Okay. All right. So
dive in.
Okay, so the Cleveland Cavaliers actually started this. Are you a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, Mike?
I am by association, by the state of Ohio. It's like, yeah. So I would say kinda, sorta.
Okay. Well, I think the Cleveland Cavaliers did this. It was when LeBron was still there, and I'm gonna say it was 2016. I'm not. Maybe no. Maybe 2015. I don't know. Whenever they won their finals championship,
Yeah.
they did this activity. Technically, a team building activity. I don't know if it was necessarily seen as that when they were doing it, but everyone gets a puzzle piece for something that they did well or something that they just think was like remarkable. And it can be anybody on the team. It wasn't like team leaders that was like, hey, Nick, you did something really well. Like you scored 30 points in last night's game. Like here's a puzzle piece. But yeah, it's just like 150 puzzle pieces. No one knows what it is besides maybe a team captain. But let's say every Sunday, and this is what this cross country team did. Every Sunday, everyone would get together at practice before their long run, and anyone, and I mean a freshman, could nominate a senior for a puzzle piece. A senior could nominate a freshman for a puzzle piece. It could be performance based. It could be, I don't know, you made dinner for the team last Monday or whatever it was. Just anything to help the team, something, maybe even a positive attitude. Hey, here's this puzzle piece. And it kind of brought people together. And even though it's like, oh my God, what does this puzzle piece even mean? Well, at the very end of the year, their goal was a national championship. At the very end, a week before the national championship, everybody came together. And like Mike said, only 7 people actually race in that national championship, whereas the team as a whole could be 35 people. I know most teams aren't that big, but at Adams State, usually teams are about that big.
Yeah.
35 people get together and they make this puzzle. And they put all the puzzles together. People just reminisce on why they got their puzzle piece and why they're such a great teammate, even though they didn't actually say it like that. Got together, and it was a picture of a bunch of hands holding up a national championship trophy. And it was kind of this thing of like, even though not all 35 of us can compete in this national championship race, we're all doing it for a purpose. I might take the lead on this rep, even though I'm just a measly freshman, to break the win for someone that is going to compete for our team. And then they ended up winning the national championship, despite not even winning conference, not even winning regionals. They won the national championship meet. But one person that was on that national championship team and raced, he said that when he was just down in the dumps, 8K into his 10K race, he saw one of his teammates on the sideline who was just rooting really hard for him. I don't know. Let's just call that person a freshman. And it was like, let's go, Kyle, or whatever his name was. And he just remembers like, all right, I'm gonna dig deeper for him because I remember how much work he always came to practice early. He took that rep for me last week, let's just say. So back to the environment thing, like maybe it was because these guys are just so close, like, hey, I want to do anything for you to make our team better. And I think that might have been one reason why. I don't think it was the reason. It goes back to whoever the leader is on the team, the coach, the environment, but also just the fact of the structure of the sport. We're all competing for, or we're all training for the 8K during the regular season and the 10K at the championship level. So that brings us together. Whereas in track, it's like, okay, we have Mike that's training for the 800, and then we have Nick that's training for the 10K. Like those trainings, although y'all are still running and you might be together on like easy days, on some parts it's a little bit broken up. Where when Mike is actually racing, Nick might be warming up and you can't cheer him on, for instance. Yeah.
You hit on something about environment, and I want to tie back in that because on our last episode with Morgan, we talked about how important environments are and who helps create those environments, who helps lift them up, who's kind of the level-headed, whether it's leader, teammate, how coaches play into that. And you brought an interesting perspective talking about the city. I don't think we hit on that with Morgan, but I think that is an underrated, or maybe even an undervalued piece of that culture and that environment. Because, like you said, when you are isolated and it's just the team, that's all you have. Those are your brothers and sisters for the year, for however long you're in that program, and those are the people that you're going to mesh with. And when it comes down to it, and when you have to call on somebody, you hope that you can call on them and they'll come and be there for you in those moments. So I think that was a huge piece to bring up. Like, that was something that we didn't talk about or didn't even think about maybe on last week's episode. So I appreciate you bringing that up and kind of bringing that dynamic into play there. And on top of that, going back to the coach and culture thing, I don't think it gets any more important than the coach. I think leadership from that standpoint is very much so top down. And when the coach sets the tone for the environment, the team, the culture, the program, it affects everybody else all the way down to the freshmen, all the way down to the recruiting class that you're bringing in when recruits are on campus. And you can feel that. You can feel whether the culture of a team is good or not, if it's something that you want to be a part of. And that's a huge reason why people choose to go to school where they go to school. And when I was going through my recruiting process, I was told, and I'm glad I listened.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what coach it was that told me this, but they said, don't commit to a coach in particular. Now, that's not to say that there aren't phenomenal coaches out here, which there are. Don't commit to a coach. Yeah. Commit to a program. Take a look at the entire university, the program, the sports they have there. See what the culture is like, because the administrators and leaders up top will always put the right people in place when it comes down to it. Coaches retire, coaches get fired, coaches get promoted, coaches accept new jobs, whatever it is. They will always put the right people in place to make sure that culture and that environment is maintained, and that team and school continues their success. So that's a huge piece, man.
If I could, sorry, this stuff is, and I think being, especially with Adams State being at the Division II level, it doesn't receive a whole lot of notoriety, or people don't know a whole lot about like Division II schools. And I think Adams State's really unique, not only in the success that it has, but like the coach that they currently have has literally been there for, I think, 36 years. Yeah. And the coach before him was there for like literally 30 something years. So there is something about the culture that this coach brings. And when I was being recruited, and I guarantee you it looked completely different than when Mike was recruited, because I never went on an official visit or anything. But when I sat down with him in his office, his main thing was, I want someone who works hard. And that was it. It's like, hey, I just want a hard worker. Yeah. I don't care about how fast you are, I want you to work hard. And that sets the tone for it, literally everything, like not only racing, but training. And not only training on those hard days where you're doing like mile repeats or something, but on those like easy days of 45 minutes, like, okay, I need to take this really, really easy because I know tomorrow's going to be really hard, for instance. But when you say, I want a hard worker, not like, hey, I just want someone who runs fast. Like, I need you to run fast every single week. Well, let's say at that very first meet, you don't run fast. And then all of a sudden you're like, your mind's in the gutter. It's like, well, why am I even here?
Right.
So, and then another thing, on the last thing that I'll say about this, maybe, who knows? But Coach Martin is his name, Coach Damon Martin. He comes to practice every single day with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
It can be negative 20 degrees outside, 60-mile-per-hour winds. And he always says, with a smile on his face, today is a beautiful day. And no matter if it actually is a beautiful day outside by like, okay, yeah, it's 60 degrees and sunny, like no wind. That's awesome. But it kind of sets the tone that even though it might not weather-wise be a beautiful day, it's like today is a beautiful day because you're going to make it a beautiful day. You're going to be out with your friends who are your teammates.
Right.
Yeah. So
again, we talked about that last week, Nick. Process versus outcome. You are not consumed with this is the end point. I got to get here. Do whatever I can to be at the end. That coach sounds like he is in love with the process. He is in love with the day-to-day small things that produce the best possible outcome. So that is, again, this is all spot on. I mean, I kind of wish you were on the episode last week with Morgan. I think we would have had some great back and forth between y'all. Might have added a different dynamic. So you're right on with all this.
Yeah, and I mean, I even think right? Like your coach saying, I want someone who works hard, similar to last week. Like Mike said, one thing we talked about, like I had a professor again who he knew who he wanted to TA his course by the first 10 seconds of the interview because he wanted someone who was passionate. And putting that in running terms, look, if you're slow but you like working, I can make you faster. We're going to get better together.
Right.
But if you're good and you don't like working, you just like the outcome, and you jump up a level to college and you're not winning anymore, you get a promotion at work and you're no longer hitting the same numbers you were, and you only like the outcome, we might hit a wall there, right? And so I can I can teach someone who's passionate. I can work with that, but I can't necessarily improve on somebody who only wants that outcome, right? I want somebody who loves the process. And those
Yeah.
tends to be some of those people who are the most motivational, right? Our Kobe's of the world, or the most successful. So I think that's a huge point.
Hey Nick, I wanna ask you
Yeah.
a question, and I guess for you and you too, Seth. I know we talked about the we, the greater good, doing something bigger than ourselves. How
Mhm.
do you all feel about the thought of when I focus on the me, it helps to take care of the we?
Mhm.
So when it comes down to it, like if I'm doing my job, if I'm on top of everything that I can be on top of, I'm controlling what I can control. Nick and you and I talked a lot about this one-on-one.
Mhm.
Control what you can control.
Yeah.
Focusing on the me, it'll ultimately help the we in the greater good at some point. So tying it back to somebody who works hard, right? You want somebody who works hard. That person is going to work hard for themselves and then also ultimately for the person next to them. Like I'm going to focus on me being the best version of me. Seth, you said a freshman going out leading a rep, taking the win for somebody. Okay, I'm doing this for me right now. It's going to make me stronger as a runner, get this experience. I'm also doing this for the week. For the guys behind me, I'm taking the win for. When I step out the way to let them keep rolling, there is some greater good there. So how do y'all feel about that concept of I'm going to take care of me, which sounds selfish, but ultimately it's going to help out the we?
Yeah. Seth.
Yeah. So I actually, one of my participants in my thesis talked about this, and this is just an example of them at a national meet. So it might not be just completely representative of like taking the rep at in practice kind of thing, but I think it
Right.
is an interesting perspective. This person, national meet for cross country, this person said, I feel like shit. Hopefully, we're able to swear. Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't ask that before.
Hey,
Okay.
this is a family friendly podcast, Seth. All
You're
right,
good. Keep
get
going.
it together.
Okay. So this person was like, I feel like shit, but I know that if we want to have a chance at winning this national title, I need to be in the top 5 individually.
Yeah.
Now, that's a mindset for this person in the race. Now, if this person were to take that out and think about it like week to week, the point of, I don't know, let's just say 2 weeks out from the national meet, this person's like, well, I'm not gonna converse with my teammates because I know like, oh, I need to be top 5 in the race. So I'm just gonna focus on myself. I'm not gonna run with these other people. It's like a mindset of, is that how you're approaching the season? Is that how you're approaching the week? Is that how you're approaching a training, or just during the race? Because I think if this athlete were to have said, well, I just need to focus on my individual performance, I need to get top 5, and this person said that before every single practice, then they would have
Mhm.
approached training much differently than if they said, we are trying to win a national championship. So let's bring it together. Let's have team dinners on
Right,
Sunday.
right.
Um, so I completely agree. I also have it'd be a couple different points streamlined together. So might be a little bit of a word vomit by me, I guess would be the term that I'll use. Um, so the environment, kind of tying it back in with that, right? Like setting the environment is huge. Again, there's multiple factors, so I do want to acknowledge that like we're exploring different avenues here, but there are certainly some that we won't take, right? So for instance, like is it a coincidence that in Seth's case the D2 national championships are in a more rural town in Colorado with great trails around it? And similarly in high school, I honestly don't know as of now, but I know that when I was graduating and around them, the school across town in Syracuse, Fayetteville Manlius, was a powerhouse in women's cross country. 12 straight national championships. Last time I checked, might have been longer, right? They were also near the best trail in Syracuse. And I know that went for went for a while. There were some good loops around there, and the coach had certain philosophies as well, so other factors there. But the environment matters a lot, and it really sets you up for success, which is something we've talked about previously. Or maybe encourages success, but doesn't do a great job at always setting you up for it. So that's a big one. Second thing, I want to tie this back in as well. There's a couple different topics going on here, right? But with the military, again, like that buy-in piece struck out to me, right? Like the people who wind up staying in for a long time in the military versus the people who go in and leave is very similar to those who do very well at whatever they're doing, including sports. Even if my coach's plan isn't going to lead to the best possible performance than me, buying into it 100% is better than buying in 80% thinking I know better and then doing a little bit of my own stuff, right? And so that buy-in is a huge predictor of performance. I mean, my coach switched things up left and right, but those who bought into it every single year, even though it was different, did the best. And that's something I wish I did more of, because he had rationality, he had reasons for all these things. And if he saw something that was better, he went for it, and that caused a change. And I've failed to have that buy-in at times, and I think that would have produced better outcomes for me. And so that's another thing, right? And so when you're doing something, are you bought in? Like, are you skeptical? I think skepticism is good, but I do think you got to buy into what you're doing and not think about what you're not doing as much. And that's something that me and Mike have talked about off record as well. But with that also comes the doing it for your country that you mentioned with the military, which I'll tie back in with the are you doing it for the team or doing it for you? I think that's an interesting piece here. And so when you're running, are you running for your own growth to be better than others because you can't let the team down? Those are all different kind of styles of motivation, if you will, within psychology. And I think it's worth noticing here. One thing that we've referenced in the past, and you kind of took it to another level here, Seth, is so I had a corny saying at Fleet Feet. Seth knows this. Nat knows this. This was a little bit after Mike's time, but I would walk in with a smile on my face, and I would say something like, "Growth is you versus you." And the idea is not to say you are only competing against yourself. That's ridiculous. But it does start with you versus you. And so if you want to beat somebody in cross country and you're not currently there, that starts with you. So how can you get better? And then you can worry about the social comparison. And so it's a self comparison first. And that's what growth is. Growth is you versus yourself. And then wherever your growth lands you is where you get that social piece. Right. And a lot of times the people who get in trouble are the ones who the primary motivation is that comparison and thus that outcome that Mike had mentioned rather than the process. So I think that's huge. And I think that even ties in with the puzzle pieces that you had. Um, and particularly to Mike's question, like, when is me more important and when is we more important? I think it comes down to the mindset. When push comes to shove, are you like willing to prioritize one or the other if you have to? That's the interesting split to me, right? Like, if you have to decide, is this for me or for the team? That's when we really learn a lot, because a lot of times they do overlap, and me getting better, like you said, helps the team. But sometimes I got to work for me, and knowing when that time is and when that time is not is very interesting, especially outside of sports, right? Like, when do you switch jobs? At the cost to your team. Obviously, you are first here. If you're switching and taking a promotion, when is that okay? When is that not okay? Right?
Yeah. One example might be, if we're keeping it in the realm of sports, is you're feeling a little bit of a pain in your knee. A
Right.
couple weeks before, like, the championship meet. Like, do you take a day off because that's probably going to benefit you and your body
Mhm.
right now? But it's like,
Mhm.
oh man, but you're the number one runner on your team. Like, what do you do in that sense?
Yeah. Mike, did you have something there? Look at
You got it. You got it. Rip it.
it. I mean, that's interesting to me because I always prioritize me, like, to my own downfall, to my team's downfall as well, perhaps. I mean, but at the same time, we talked about this briefly. The interesting dynamic. I folded like a chair on race day, but in practice, I was pretty good my senior year, and even some of my junior year leading up to it. There were workouts where, like you said, like maybe the not the star is leading the rep and pushing those who are leaders. And I feel like, to me, I remember some of those moments. Um, and that's where I would tie it back to your puzzle piece, right? Is that culture and that effective praise and showing appreciation for what people do well, and not necessarily focusing on those shortcomings, right? Like for me, for myself, it's easy to focus on those positives, but when other people are taking in those positives, I think that actually sets up the environment that we've been talking about, right? That effective acknowledgement of what you do well and what you add to the team is huge. I mean, that's how you tell people how to replicate good behavior, you know? And so I think that really sets you up for success. In terms of like the knee injury, I was not good at putting the team first. I'll be completely honest with that. If my Achilles was sore, I tried to deal with that because I was like, well, I'm going to use that the rest of my life. This cross country thing isn't going to last that long, and I'm not scoring any points, which perhaps is the wrong mindset. Looking back on it, but that's how I reacted to it.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, honestly. Like, I think anyone, whoever you ask, would be lying if there wasn't some selfishness or some selfish thoughts that they had in the realm of sports. And there might be a few people who are, nah, I always put the team first, put the team on my back, got to do whatever I can for the team. Like, okay, yeah, you say that, but I'm sure that there were times where you had a selfish thought and you thought, I got to do this for me. I got to watch out for number one. I got to make sure that I'm all right, like regardless of what's going on with the team. It's an Achilles injury. It's stuff happening in my personal life. I didn't go as hard at practice, like whatever you want to fill in the blank there. So like, Nick, I think you're in good company with that. In particular, I don't think there's a single person, maybe aside from Kobe. You know, I don't know. We don't have the opportunity to interview him down the road. Like, I know we'd get there eventually. But he might be the only one who always is like team. Like I'm working on me, but it's gonna be for the greater good of the team. Other than that, like, man, I think that's a fair point to make. That's a fair point.
I think also a perspective that we could take that not a lot of people talk about are those people that know for a fact that they're not going to get playing time, for instance, or get a spot on those championship teams. If you look at like a Florida State, for instance, or just any football team, like how good is their scout team?
Yeah.
Usually, okay, they might be good players, but a lot of those people, they know for a fact that they're not going to see the field. But they know they put in the work. They make sure that the quarterback's getting like really good reps that might be replicable in the actual game that they have that weekend. Or those freshmen that they know that they're not very fast, but they are willing to go a little bit harder during that rep to make sure that those people aren't going to have to take the win, for instance. I think that's a really good way to see not only the team as a whole, but also those people that just really know I'm going to really put this team before myself, despite I'm not going to get that admiration.
And Mike, did you have something? Okay. I keep saying that. It's always worth checking. But you had a aha moment for me right there, Seth, which was that scout team. So performance wise for that football team, I'm gonna say, like if the first team is here, the scout team is a tier down. Okay. Like your second, your third, your fourth string, as you go down, you're not seeing as much playing time. There's not as much production from those guys, but they do play a vital role in the culture, right?
Absolutely.
Similarly, I'm going to propose the business hierarchy might work like that. And so if you're on the ground floor level of a business, you have a role in that business. You're getting playing time per se. But in terms of a value of production, the higher you go up, the more, proportionally that playing time or that value comes out, the higher production you're getting as you go up into management. But that ground floor still matters, doesn't it? That company culture still matters because that's also more people we're talking about. The third and the fourth team is still, and the fifth team is bigger than the second team, the backups, or the first team, the starters, by a good bit. And I think that leads us into the clip that Michael had sent about if we have two axes, right? And so let's see, I want to go like this for the camera. But so if our vertical axis is performance, so how good are you at your job, and your horizontal axis is trust. Okay. The video that we watched, which was, I believe, Simon Sinek is how you say his name. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, but
Yeah.
He basically said, it's who you are at work and who you are outside of work, and how good you are at that. So in the performance axis, it's, would I trust you with my life, particularly with like the Navy SEALs, or if I need you to sell, something in sales, can I count on you to do that?
Right.
And then the trust axis is, will I trust you with my money and my wife? So outside of the workplace, where do you fall
Yeah.
there? The interesting point was, if you're low in performance and you're low in trust, nobody wants you, right? You're at the bottom of the barrel.
Yep.
Similarly, if you're high in performance and you're high in trust, you're top of the barrel. Everybody wants you, right? And then you get to your two corners that we haven't mentioned. So let's say you're high in performance, but you're low in trust. That's actually less valuable in this scenario than someone who's medium and even low at times in performance, but is high in trust. And the point that he made with businesses was, it's really easy to find the person who's high in performance and low in trust. You can walk into an office and say, who's the asshole? And they'll point you in the right direction, right? But if you ask them like, hey, who could you trust with anything? Who could you turn to, in any moment, whether it's low or high, and you can count on them to be there for you. That's where you find somebody who's maybe not the highest in performance, but they're highest in trust, right? And those are the people who become really valuable. That's who you actually want. And that's who I would suspect that those higher up CEOs know to keep around. Is obviously you have to have performance, but you have to have an adequate balance of people to kind of keep that team culture in check. Those people who are high in trust. And I think similarly on the scout team and in those backups, like if you're a head coach, those are the guys that I want to keep around. That's the locker room I want to have.
Right. Right.
So that's where my mind went. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I actually, so to those thoughts, and you hit on it just here at the end for a second, when you talk about having people who are high in trust. They may not be your best performers, but I want to tie it back to something that Seth said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I want somebody who works hard. I want somebody who I trust will put forth a great effort, be smart about training, get in here and just grind. And you may not be high in performance right now, but performance can be taught. It's hard to teach trust. It's hard to teach authenticity. It's hard to teach good character. Like those things, you have them or you don't. So to have that person, this is somebody I can trust. We can work on the performance piece. We can get you there, but I need you for the core of my organization, whether that's again personal, sports, business, however you want to look at that. Which leads me to a question I have for y'all, and I think it'd be cool if we do a small activity, kind of like we did last episode here.
Yeah.
And I had this thought earlier. You all are coaches, right? Of whatever program, whatever team, whatever sport that you choose to coach. There are maybe one or two guys on the team who are cancerous or contagious or are heading in that direction. But these are your, we'll say, top 1, 2, 3 performers, athletes, people in your circle. How do you all approach that? Are y'all getting rid of them? Are y'all keeping them? Are y'all benching them? What are you doing to, I don't want to skew the question. What are you all doing in that scenario? So if you have an answer, feel free to go ahead. But if you need to take a second to think about it, and then we can jump in from there.
I can start. I feel like this might be perceived as a cop-out answer. I'm going to be honest. But this is my first thought is, from the very beginning, not only of your tenure as a coach at this university, school, organization, whatever it is, but also that season is, how are you going to set the standard when you're recruiting athletes? If you say, I want a hard worker, someone who gets along with everybody, for instance, then one, you might be less likely for those athletes to become those bad apples, or cancers, or however we want to call them. But also, you have to go back to that. If you recruit them, said we're going to be hard workers, I want someone who's going to be a team player, and you notice
Yeah.
that these three people are bad apples, you bring them into the office. It's like, hey, we agreed on this. For instance, like what's going on here? How can we fix that? If you were a coach that didn't set that standard, then it's like, well, I didn't necessarily tell him that he couldn't, be acting this way, for instance. And then that goes to not only as a coach as recruiting, but starting the season of setting team norms of how are we going to behave at practice? How are we going to behave in general towards our teammates, towards everyone? Doesn't necessarily need to be just people on your team. But usually, in at least in sports and with my experiences, that's something that the whole team comes up with. Everyone agrees on that. Some teams even go to the extent of literally like printing out a contract that has all of these norms on there, all these standards for behavior, and then you sign it at the very bottom. But
Mhm.
that goes back to setting the standard. We said at the very beginning of the season, this is how we're going to act, and now you're acting like this. Like, what's going on here? So
Mhm.
kind of a cop out answer, but I think that's how I would approach it, is making sure we're getting people on the same page from day one.
Yeah.
And so I'll add to that. I think, Seth, you're 100% on the money that the culture means a lot here, right? And so obviously, we would like to think that if any of the three of us were in a leadership role like that, you would have established a culture that maybe would prevent this, or you would have scouted the athletes coming in or whatever. But for the sake of Mike's question, I'll assume that failed for whatever reason. Maybe I didn't set it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe somebody had some other external events going on that's changed their view on things, right? And so I've got 1 to 3 toxic members of the team. I'm the head of that team. How am I dealing with that, right? First step, I think, Seth, is right, is the culture and leaning on that. And I think leveraging the values of the culture, if you have that in place, is huge. So leveraging their personal values and things that they agreed are important and talking about their behaviors with I think, is step one. Step two, I think, and really this could be step one as well, is the relationship you have with them. Just because someone is toxic doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with them. And I think that's going to go a long way in how you solve this problem, right? Because if you have no relationship and you're asking for change from anyone, that typically doesn't go over well.
For sure.
People are not super receptive if you treat them less as an ends for themselves, but more of a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
valuing people in themselves is something that we've talked about as well. That's really important here because, again, they're not going to do much for you if they don't have a relationship with you. And so building
Right.
that relationship is key.
Right.
And then the last piece, like, really, I would try to change them. And this may be my downfall. Maybe I should just cut them and let them go. But to me, I am trying to support them as best as I can, assuming that I've got a relationship with them. And I'll tie it into autonomy support for me. And so, kind of doing things like, I want to take their perspective on the situation. I want to hear them out because they may see it a different way than the rest of the team sees it or than I see it. And so, I think that's step one. I think I want to really encourage like self initiation, whatever toxic behaviors that we have. Um, I want to talk to them about those behaviors outside and maybe open their eyes to some different perspectives if I can. Just provide that information. That's not force feeding it down their throat or anything, but just making it available to them and getting their feedback again on that and their perspective on that. And then anything that I want to change, any changes that I suggest or options. One, this is so crucial, and a lot of people miss this. If you're going to ask somebody to change, you also have to acknowledge that they don't have to change. Because if you say that you have to change, you have to quit smoking, that's pretty controlling. You're telling me what to do. I don't really feel good about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I acknowledge that not changing is an option, that's a lot less pressure that you're putting on an individual. And so I want to provide options, but I also want to provide the no option. And I want to give my perspectives on, what that entails going down the road. And so that's a really big thing for me. And for those options that you do provide like a meaningful rationale. I would again tie it back to values, but the idea would be to kind of broaden their perspective, um, and kind of building on this and hopefully adding depth to that. A question that I wrote down right before Mike asked his question was along the same lines. So We talked about trust being super important when we talked about that scale. And then we levered on that. We talked, Mike, you connected it back to Seth's points about like a hard worker is something that we want. We can work with a hard worker. It's a lot easier to teach a hard worker successful strategies because they want to get better and they want to learn, right? Than it is the other way around. Similarly, positive emotion is contagious. And if this wasn't one of the takeaways that people have with the puzzle analogy from earlier, I'll paint it a little bit clearer right now. Um, Positive emotion is some of the most contagious things that we can have. Something as simple as a smile will raise kind of dopamine levels in you just from that smile. So if you're feeling a little bit down, quite literally, if you smile, you will feel a little bit better. I know it's corny, but there's science to back that up. But also the people who see that smile get a little bit of that as well. So that's huge. And when the emotion is more than just a smile, that's even bigger. So if you can get somebody in your locker room, let's assume that you have a decent culture and it's just 1 to 3 who are toxic. Leveraging that positivity that you have available is going to be massive. And so those who are more positive, those who fall maybe not into the highest performance realm, but high in that trust realm, that's huge. But at what point does that outweigh performance? Like how good of a performer do they have to be, or how many people do you have to be that are trustworthy to outweigh 1 or 2 super phenomenal performers? Because I think in the workplace, quite frankly, we do value the toxic high performer a little bit more than is best. And I think that really leads into a lot of the culture issues that we have at organizations. But if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Mike, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I was gonna. So I'm gonna answer my own question actually first before jumping into that. I guess kind of contrary to what y'all have decided as coaches, in my opinion, ultimately I'm making an example out of those one to 3 guys, 1 to 3 girls, whoever it is, team members, if it's corporate business. I think at some point there has to be an example set, because when you start letting things slip with, and this is from personal experience, kind of from what I've seen, when you start to let things slip with 1 or 2 or 3 people, and you allow the performance to blind the, I won't say correct thing to do, but probably something that's more beneficial for the culture, when performance starts to blind that rationale, I think it creates room for other people to act certain ways, to underperform, to feel as if they can get away with certain stuff. And it might not be the same things that they're doing that are cancerous, but they start cutting corners. They start thinking that what they're doing is not being seen. So if I were in that position, coach, administrator, business leader, I think I'm making an example out of them. I think that it has to be set, and people need to understand that, look, it's not personal.
Yeah.
This is purely for the greater good of our culture, of our team. Y'all said y'all want to win championships. Y'all said y'all want to be the best business in the industry that we're in. Let's do that. Let's do that, and let's be good people while we do it. Let's perform high. Let's have high trust. Let's operate in a sense that maybe we're not a family, because I know when you start calling things a family at work and whatnot, it can blur lines and people feel obligated to do certain things. So we don't have to be that close. But when you're inside of this facility, these doors, these walls, whatever it is, there is a certain attitude, character that you need to carry here that contributes, like you said, Nick, to some positive dopamine that's going on with what we have. That's not saying that life won't happen. We understand that. You cope the way you need to cope. You'll have a support system. But ultimately, for me, we got to shut it down. We got to shut it down, and I'm doing what I think is best for the organization and for the team.
I would like to add on in a different perspective, but add on to the piece of setting an example with that puzzle piece thing. So I'm not sure what the Cleveland Cavaliers did, but at least at Adams State, what they did was every single week, there were essentially examples made, but examples of what a good teammate looks like. Every single week, we are reinforcing what we said at the very beginning of the season. I think the downfall with a lot of teams, at least as it pertains to a culture, is at the very beginning, it's like everyone's usually really excited, hopefully, that the season's starting soon. We want to win the national championship. Oh my God, I'm going to come to practice every single day and I'm going to be so excited to be here. And then that fizzles out for some people because it's like, okay, well, we set our goal, which is 5 months from now, or however long it is, depending on the season. It's a long ways away. But
Right.
with something like a puzzle piece activity that is literally every single week, it's reinforcing every single week that this is how we need to act. But my question is, and something that I have no experience of because I've never been in the corporate world, is I don't know how corporate people would take like, we were handing out puzzle pieces this Friday. It's kind of like the Buckeyes thing, like, well, not everybody has helmets that we can just put stickers on, So how is something like that? We do want to reinforce that this is what good behavior looks like. Now, it's not like these are dogs where we're going to give them a treat or something, but it is like we are reinforcing a behavior that we want as leaders.
Right.
What does that look like in the corporate space? How can we translate something like that to still be effective?
So I want to weigh in on that because I've been in what I'll consider a corporate space, not what I consider what is a corporate space for. I just started my third year. And if we want to add fleet feet in there in any capacity, we'll call it another year or two. So 3 to 5 years I've been in corporate space. One maybe a little bit more professional than the other. But to answer your question or kind of add on to your thoughts, Seth, I think the way that you reinforce that or that you get buy-in, which may be a little bit more important, it goes back to what we said earlier. You got to earn the trust, and you have to have the trust and respect of your team. And this is just my opinion. When you go to hand these puzzle pieces out, these figurative puzzle pieces, you hand these out. Somebody makes a joke, man, what the hell are we doing with these? Like, why we have these? We're not kids. We're not. You got to cut that short. Like, I understand you're not a kid. I understand that this may seem childish, but stay with me for this because I promise you there's a lesson to be learned from this. If you don't see any value in it, then we can have a discussion and maybe you have a better idea. If you don't have a better idea, then why are you complaining or why are you shutting down what we're trying to do to promote positive interactions, positivity within our team here? So to have that trust, and it's like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna try it out. Let's see what happens. Has it ever hurt to try anything? And maybe I shouldn't ask that question because it probably has hurt to try some things depending on what it is. But let's give it a go. Let me have you trust me, right? We worked shoulder to shoulder. We were back to back. I showed you that I'm gonna fight for you. You're gonna fight for me. You can trust me with this puzzle piece. If you can't trust me with this figurative puzzle piece, then we have some much more significant problems that we need to address than this little activity that we're trying to do together. So I think when it comes down to it, from my perspective and being in corporate workspaces for the past couple of years, trust is going to be the most important piece. And there are going to be some people who don't want to participate, but I think that's, again, where the example comes in like, hey, look, yeah, you might be great at what you do. You're a leader on this team. I need you to be bought into this. Even if you may not be bought in, do not vocalize that. Don't talk about it because then that dissuades other people from being bought in, or somebody who is on the fence about it, they may fall to the negative side, and that's not what we're trying to promote here. So just some thoughts I have on that.
Yeah, a couple as well for you. So I'll start with Seth. I completely agree with what you said about is corporate going to agree with the language of like a puzzle piece, right? That's a hard buy-in. Obviously, it's company to company, but like when you use language like that, it's tough. As someone who has some experience working with the military, there are ways to phrase things that are not going to work well. And so I'll give one that I think not only in the military, but just in general, I think mindfulness has an interesting connotation to it. It's been getting better, but there's definitely still some areas where mindfulness is like this Eastern concept. It's like this Buddhism thing. And really, a lot of the times, if I bring up mindfulness, I just want to talk about awareness. Like I just want awareness to increase. And so, in certain scenarios, like the word awareness works better than the word mindfulness. And I think similarly, puzzle piece might not be the most effective in all corporate ladders, but what you're really trying to touch on with the puzzle piece could be effective. It's just that language that you use for it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, like you said, when you come into the season, you got this excitement, right? You got these aspirations of winning this national championship and things like that. I'm going to tie that back to process and outcome. I mean, again, I know we're beating the horse, but if it was that easy to do it, there'd be no point in beating the dead horse, right? And so, yeah, it's a cool, easy concept. Do it then, right? It's pretty hard to put in action, but if your goal is to win the national championship, anything that happens that does not fall in line with that goal is going to be seriously demotivating, right? And that's because you are in love with and want to achieve that outcome. Now, there's
Right.
nothing wrong with achieving that outcome, but if you enjoy the process to get there, man, that's going to be a long 5 months, as you said, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that would be the biggest thing that sticks out to me is the opposite of that outcome is taking more interest in the little things. And I wrote in all caps on my notes here, gratitude and optimism. And I think those are things that you've got a good bit of experience with, Seth. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts after this. But like the idea of the puzzle piece and every week, like talking about things that go well, man, we are so programmed to think about the negativity. I was watching a TED talk on optimism from the founder of Life is Good, the t-shirt company. Very interesting one. I mean, I think if you search his name, it was, I want to say Ted or Tim, but it had a TED talk on it. Super, super, super cool, the story of that company, but it was all founded on this idea of optimism and gratitude. And the newspaper's always so negative. Well, why, man? What if we just put good stuff on a t-shirt and sold it for good causes? Like, you think people would buy into that? Well, they did. Life is Good is a pretty big company, and that was what it was founded on. And similarly, the puzzle pieces do that. And a recent example, I'm way too deep in the Auburn Reddits, but um, the guy who they just named the quarterback, Peyton Thorne, out there was an article. He asked for everybody in the facility's name because he wanted to be able to know who to essentially like thank and be grateful for every single day that he shows up to practice. And I think that's a really powerful perspective because it's a no brainer. He's not the best athlete in that quarterback room. Does he throw the prettiest ball? Word on the street is probably yes. I have no knowledge on that, right? As a fan, I'm just hoping for the best for the team, and I'll support whatever decisions that the people who get paid a lot more to think about that do. But they do talk about him as definitely a really, really good leader. And that's not to say he's better than the other guys there, but he's a really good leader. And I thought that was a great emphasis of it is, he really wants to appreciate those little things and those people that make everything possible. I mean, how often do you think about the facilities guys that are putting on the game when you're on the way to a ball game on Saturday or Sunday? And so when Mike said a lesson to be learned, that's a very interesting perspective when we talk about like the little things that are going wrong and viewing it as a lesson instead, which brought me to another TED talk. And this is my last point, but the Super Mario effect. Super cool TED talk. If you search Super Mario effect TED talk, that's on there as well. I've really been enjoying the TED talks recently, but the idea was when you're a kid, and kids are such a good example of like the right way to live, and you're playing Super Mario, what happens when you die? You just play again, right? You don't restart the game. You just learn from whatever just went wrong and you try not to do it again. Well, what happens when you're an adult and you do something wrong at work? You just avoid it. You don't come back to it, right? And so the difference is using that mistake, as Mike said, a lesson to be learned rather than a failure, right? A long term goal, a short term failure can be a success towards that long term. And so I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at your question, Seth, was just more valuing the moment, emphasizing that gratitude, that optimism, especially through the mistakes we make.
I would like to add to the gratitude piece, especially. This isn't with my experience or anyone that I know, but I was listening to this coach, and if I'm not mistaken, he's the basketball coach at Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember his name.
Jimbo Fisher.
Or the basketball coach. This is
I know. I'm messing around.
we don't like him
Virginia
anymore.
Tech, right? He was at Virginia Tech, then he went to A&M.
I believe so. Yeah, he's bounced. Not well, I won't say bounced around, but he did recently go to Texas A&M. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about. Well, so the fact is that he writes gratitude letters at almost like an alarming rate, at least from someone who doesn't usually write. Or I don't write gratitude letters, but man, I should really get in on it because he writes gratitude letters like, I don't know, 3 times a week, maybe more than that. But it is to everybody in his life. It could be like literally someone who just, I don't know, like made his coffee that morning, or a custodian at the arena, or an assistant coach, one of his players, something like that. So he holds a really high position. I mean, Texas A&M, it's in the SEC. He could easily lose that job because it's a very prestigious job. But he takes the time and he's leading from the front. Essentially, he's showing that team culture through his own actions on something that he does every single day, if not almost every single day. And that's not something you see a lot because in a lot of positions, especially those coaches that get paid quite a bit of money and have a lot on the line, we're not really thinking about, at least I've never been in that position, but I'm assuming a lot of them don't think about the custodian that makes the arena clean that they practice in. But this guy does, and maybe that has led to his success of being in such a high position. It was kind of off topic, but I guess a little bit on topic of the greater picture. It's not just about how he's, I don't know, his win-loss percentage, but the we of not my team, but the we as in everyone that I'm even surrounded with on a daily basis outside of my occupation.
Yeah. No, I think what you said is on par for everything. We don't have to keep the we confined to the teammates, the people who put on jerseys, the people who wear certain colored shirts and ties that match in the office, whatever you want to call it. Like the we, this greater community, this greater good extends much, much further than just the people that you interact with on a daily, like the people that make the operation run. Whether you're at work and you have a fleet that you manage and you have to outsource this to a company down the road, that's a part of your we. That's a part of your community. Like those people keep you up and running, help keep your business going. So no, I think you're spot on. It wasn't off topic at all for you to add that in there. I think that expressing gratitude to those people helps keep you running, keep your business going, your team going. It's the same way if you want to look at it from a different perspective. Athletic trainers, right? If you want to take it back to sports, they don't put on the jerseys at all. Sometimes they're not seen. If you got to run back to the locker room real fast, get taped up, or when they pull up the pop-up tent on the sideline for games, it's the same thing. Those people are still a part of the we. Those people still help the team and the business operate. Like they are just as much a part of that greater good and the greater whole as the person that you're standing next to on the field, on the track, on the pitch, whatever it may be. So for sure.
Another occupation within sports, but not really, are academic counselors, or like FSU.
Yeah.
They're people who their job is to advance the education of these student athletes, and FSU has quite a lot of them that literally just focus on athletes, and they have so much on the line. If these athletes are not eligible because they failed this class, like you're losing your job.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole reason why you're here. Like we obviously we would hope that all student athletes want to do well in their classes, but that's just not the case at any level. Now, some people at, let's say, like Division III, like they tend to be like Ivy League schools. You know, they might put a little bit more emphasis on it, but mostly not a lot of people do. And it's your job, and you don't get paid a lot of money, and you get paid actually pretty close to nothing. And out of your master's, so you not only have a bachelor's degree, but you have a master's degree in this athletic academic counseling. It's almost a requirement that you do this 1-year fellowship, internship, however you want to call it. And sometimes it's like pennies on the dollar to do that. in order for you to get a job that doesn't exist at a whole lot of even big universities, let alone some of these small universities that have nowhere near the budget to have those kind of resources. So to put yourself in that position of having a lot of unknown ahead of you, as well as a lot of risk on like almost a day-to-day basis, you almost have to do it for the greater good, because you're definitely not doing it for your wallet.
For sure.
Dude, and I think both of you bring up so many good points again. This is a recurring theme this episode, so I appreciate both you guys for that. But I'm going to start with like kids again. Such a good example, dude. How many times your mom just say thank you when somebody does anything for you? When did you stop doing that, or did you stop doing that? I think a lot of people did. Not everybody did. I would like to think that the three of us here in Nat still say thank you a good bit. But there's people who just that rubbed off, and having that gratefulness for, as Seth said, the people whose livelihood, their jobs are on the line for these other people who might not even care, or don't even think twice about whatever that job may be. That's such a crazy concept of, the people in those, maybe, I don't want to say lesser roles, but in terms of production on the playing field, lesser roles. Um, it means everything to them, and they're probably more willing, I might argue, to say thank you for those small things. And then to others, it might not be as big of a thing. I think that really emphasizes overall that, the negativity bias, a very simple kind of idea. But if you have, your number of thoughts a day could range from 5,000 to 90,000, depending on what you want to classify as a thought and what studies you want to use. Regardless, I think the number is 80% roughly of them are negative. How do you fix that? Focus on the positive intentionally. And so some of the things that stick out from me for you guys, and activities and things that I've really seen a benefit from, I would encourage anybody listening to do. There's three of them, so I'll run through them real quick and then I'll pass it back to you guys. Similar to the A&M coach with the gratitude notes. The first was the 5-to-1 ratio. Did you know that most people give out, on average, maybe about 5 like complaints to a single person per compliment they give back? That's crazy, man. Challenge yourself to do better. Flip that ratio. Give 5 compliments to 1 complaint. It's going to be a lot harder than you think, but challenge yourself to get there, or at least do better than 5-to-1 in the negative ratio.
Right.
Also, this is one that I try to do most days. And so with Miss Caitlin, 3 good things that happen to you at the end of the day, just like getting into a habit of that, right? Habits, 21 roughly days to 54, depending on what research you want to use again. But end of the day, if you got somebody, that you're going to be talking with at the end of the day, roommate, significant other, you name it, parent, whatever. What's 3 good things that happen to you? What's 3 good things that happen to them? Even at the dinner table, like if you can even get 1 in, 1's better than 0. But flip that script to just something positive. And then lastly, one thing that I do both at work and definitely here in my personal life a lot more is sticky notes. A lot of times I'll head off to work, and so you might wake up later than me. I'll leave a sticky note for them to wake up to, something I'm appreciative of, something like that. So that gratitude note, like the Texas A&M coach kind of did. I can tell you that that's probably one of the most powerful things, powerful impacts that I think I have on other people. Is that's always really, really appreciated, and I'm really glad that that's a thing. And it feels really good if I get them back too. I don't need them back. That's not the point of it. But similarly, it has a strong impact on me on the receiving end, as well as the giving end.
Nick, you're so cute, man. That's adorable. You leave little sticky notes around. Just nice little. You roll over. Got a little. Look at the pillow. Nice little sticky note there. You ain't slick. I know what you're trying to do. All right. I get. At the end of the day, leave a sticky note in the morning. 3 good things that happen to you at the end of the day. Hey, can I be the 4th? All right. Look, I know where you're going. I got it.
Something I'd like to add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
While we're talking about it, and we talked about being people of action, like this is meant to put good out for people to listen to. I would love it if we all could, real quick. Nat, this includes you too. Even though we can't see you right now, I know you're laughing about this, but let's take a minute and everybody find two people to send a quick text message to, like, hey, super thankful and appreciative for you, however you want to phrase it. Just two people. And for anybody listening to this, y'all do the same thing. Like, we talk about putting good out there. Like, there's no reason to wait. There's no reason to stall it. So shoot a quick message to two people. And there's no better time than now.
So if you want to have your point during this as well, we can try to multitask.
Yeah, I can bring it up. I did see something along the lines of sticky notes, and that was actually something that I've done with my partner, Elisa. And that was one thing that we did at the very beginning of our relationship, that we had classes together in undergrad. So I would bring one to class. She would bring one to class. And I remember that always meant so much to me. And I think this might be an empirical research finding, but it's the visual representation and the ability for that person to go back and see these kind words is everything. Saying to Nick, like, hey man, I really appreciate this, that, and the other thing. Like, you might remember, oh yeah, Seth said that to me. But if I were to shoot you a text, if your advisor, your professor sent you an email, you could print out that email, put it on your wall or something. You'll always remember that professor said, man, you did such a good job, a great job on this assignment, for instance. And sending that, or giving a sticky note to your partner, that's something that they can put on their wall, on their door. Every time they open their door, they can see that you wish them a good morning and hope you have a beautiful day. That's really important. Having visual reminders, something that somebody can go back to when that person's not having a great day, or even if they are having a good day. Like, it can expound how great of a day they're having, or if they're really down in the dumps, it's something that can bring them back. So that's why it's so important to have those things that are durable, that can be brought back.
Yeah, I mean, having that physical, that tangible copy, I mean, similarly, right? Like, if you write notes out, you tend to remember them more, and they have a stronger impact on you than if you type them up or see them on the PowerPoint presentation. Um, and I also think, like, further evidence for that would be the puzzle pieces that you brought up, right? I mean, that's a tangible piece. And if you want to take it to the next level too, something that we've talked about briefly in the past was, when we critique people, we often say what went wrong and how you could do that better. When people do things well, like, instead of a, hey, you did great at this, name the strategy that was great, right? Like, give some effective praise in the sense of, like, Seth, when you sold that shoe at Fleet Feet, right? I'm like, hey, I really like how you sat on the bench with the customer. You met them at their tone and their pace, their body language. You matched all that. You were willing to listen to what they had to say before you spoke. I thought that was really effective and really built a connection with them that then benefited you. They trusted what you had to say because of that. Right. Now, you know what it is that you did well and what you can do next time that'll work. Right. And that's really what we, creates those, you get that outcome over and over again. You can reproduce that positive outcome. And so I think that's huge. And again, hammering at home, positive emotions contagious, if this isn't apparent through the last couple things that people have said.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something else I wanted to say, but I wasn't sure if I should say it. Was, if we're going to continue with the Fleet Feet, sold a shoe, engage with the customer really well, I think something that would make me buy in even more into, like, man, that I did that really well, is if you said, like, how that made you feel, especially as you're the one who trained me how to sell shoes. You're like, man, like, oh, you just made me so proud of, like, this is you just checked off the list exactly how I had thought. Like, that made me feel so proud. I think that would make me want to try harder day in and day out for you and for the brand.
Yeah, and to Mike's point too, that he's had a couple different times was, and I think you brought it up, and I've brought it up as well. But, like, that trust factor is big, right? Like, so if we have that relationship and you value that relationship, then yeah, exactly like you said, if that made me feel good as, somebody who's trained you, and you value my opinion, that's just going to amplify it, right? And so that relationship really, that trust really amplifies everything we're talking about as well. And that trust over multiple people builds the culture. But yeah, I completely agree.
Bringing it back. Also, sorry, we're really hammering home this puzzle piece thing. But
That's it's a great idea.
I think not only giving, so that obviously giving the puzzle piece and saying like this is why I'm giving it to you is important. Writing on the back of that puzzle piece why you got it is also really important, because at the very end, when you're nearing that goal and everyone's huddled around trying to, before they build this puzzle piece, everyone goes around and says, oh, I got this puzzle piece because I brought a good attitude to practice, after maybe we didn't do so well at a meet. That can bring all these emotions back of how much effort we put in as a team to get to where we are now. But also, just like with the having some sort of visual representation to bring us through into the future of this puzzle piece. And let's just say, so with this team, it was hands holding up a national championship trophy. You can just put that in the locker room and they can see that during the track season. And who knows, maybe during the track season, people might be more oriented to a team goal because there is that thing that means so much, at least to that distance group. Who knows if that could translate over to the sprinters, to the throwers, or if that puzzle piece thing can even look somewhat realistic in a track team. But yeah, just having something that can extend into the future, that we remember what brought us here and all the things, even down to the little tiny details that made us such a great team and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up here, and I'll end on a couple cliches that maybe might, as Seth said, kind of create that for the future. But building off of what Seth said, building off of this idea of identifying strategies that are successful so that we can continue to use them, that evidence is so powerful, right? Like, why do you adopt other people's training methods off of TikTok, off of your personal trainers, your coaches? Why do you adopt different strategies in the business world in terms of sales techniques and management techniques, or just communicating with people more broadly? Right, a lot of it is driven from evidence. Like, if you see evidence that this works, I want to do that, right? I want to mirror that. I want to replicate that. I want to hopefully replicate those results. And especially if I like the process, I want to replicate that, right? Especially if I like the process, that's going to be more sustainable for me to continue doing over the long term. The parallel that strikes for me, and I would guess both of you as well, and any runners out there, but also people who have just been in different environments, right? My training is going to be really different than Mike's at Florida State or Seth's at Adams State in terms of what we're doing. Like, are we taking our easy runs easy? Or are we taking our easy runs fast? Are we taking them extra slow? Right? Different programs have different things, and that varies a lot. And a lot of the top teams don't do the same thing, but they are all bought into whatever they're doing. And so I would tie that back into that level of buy-in and the importance of that and the culture that creates. And say that that's just massive. Like, regardless of the company, like if the employees are bought into whatever it is they're doing and they're passionate about it, even if it's dead wrong, you might still see really good results just because that culture is so good, right? And your mindset as an individual plays a big role in that. And then we amplify that over multiple people, that plays a bigger role. And so I can't really control what other people are doing. I can't control what they're thinking or how their attitude is in the situation. I can control my own, though. And I can challenge myself to see, my first instinct is like, this isn't that great. I can challenge myself to see the positives in it and adapt to a culture and buy in and try that. I can control that. And that's powerful because, again, that's going to amplify, especially if other people see that and that's successful. And so 2 quotes recently that have really stuck with me, mantras, if you will, if people want to carry them out. One is from a student we had in one of our courses at work. It was my man Akiva. But if you stay ready, you don't got to get ready. And so in terms of being bought in and staying locked in, just being on top of it, not viewing it as something that you got to get to, but just being the best that you can now is staying ready so that you don't got to do it later, right? Don't make more work for yourself later by being lazy now. And then another one that I very recently heard through Josh Pate's podcast, on a late kick for 24/7 sports and CBS college football, almost that time of the year. Go Knowles for Seth. Go Knowles for Mike. Where you go for me, but I'll support the Knowles. Could be a
And
good
go Knowles for Nick too. Okay.
game. USC though, out in Southern California, their motto this year, which I think is a little scary because they got some talent, but I am concerned sometimes they've given up in the past. Don't always finish the game. In the locker room, they're saying no finish line this year. I think that is powerful. So the outcome doesn't matter. We're just going to be the best that we can, and we're going to be happy with that. There's no finish line. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep getting better. Love that. Absolutely love that. But I'll toss it back to you guys if there's any final points you have on any of that.
I think that no finish line, like it's going in my head, tying it back to what we talked to earlier. Man, process versus end result or outcome. That is in a nutshell my thought of no finish line. Guys, just fall in love with the process. Nobody needs to be looking forward to the national championship game. We got to worry about what's right in front of us and enjoying the ride along the way. If we enjoy this process, we'll ultimately end up there. But this doesn't stop because after that national championship game, there's another season to be played. We got another year. So like no finish line, I think that's powerful. I think that's really powerful. Like some people might be like, I need to finish. I need to know what I'm working towards. Fall in love with that process, and whatever you're working towards, you'll eventually hit it. You'll eventually hit it.
Yeah, something to my favorite team, the Florida State University Seminoles, it's similar. It's similar in the way of we're not thinking about just the goal, but on some of the shirts that at least the football team has. I don't know if other sports have this too at FSU, but it's we are all we have, we are all we need, we're all we got, we are all we got, or we're all we got, we're all we need. But it's keeping it in house. It's like we don't need to rely on anything else. We're not thinking about what was in the news about us last week.
Yeah.
We're thinking about us here. And something I wanted to bring up because groups are so interesting. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit passionate about groups, but all groups are made up of individuals, and all individuals are unique. But one thing that I think could be really interesting to talk about that we definitely don't have time to do today is thinking about a group like a country, for instance. We think about Canada and everyone's like, oh yeah, Canada's so friendly. Well, what makes Canada so friendly? It's definitely not the weather, So what makes people think of Canada and have these thoughts? What makes people think about the United States and have these certain thoughts? Like what do individual people do that makes up this culture as a country, not only as like a cross country team or a track team or a business group, for instance. Just as like, I don't know. It's really interesting to think about because countries, if we're thinking about it as whole culture, that's really diverse, especially for a lot of countries. So just a thought.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's huge. I think you hit it on the head. It is everything that we talk about on an individual level is even crazier on a group level, because like you said, bunch of different individuals make up a group, and every individual is unique. I think there's a lot of strategies that we mentioned, and I think that on an individual level, they make a lot of sense. There's some good takeaways here that we've touched on. But how do you encourage those in others is always the next step, and that's one that I know that Seth, you probably spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's one that I'd like to challenge myself to think more about. But again, you want to replicate that behavior not only in yourself but in others. As we've talked about in the past, awareness is always step one. Somebody's aware of what it is, or we're just getting lucky, right? And a happy coincidence. But I will say, Mike's point, and kind of with the no finish line to end it on a high note, getting that sort of mentality and helping others get to that mentality, just focusing on and falling in love with what you do, and not what it gets you, is massive. And the example I'll use is something we talked about. So Seth ran an ultra marathon, and the cutoff was you said about 5 hours was the first cutoff.
Yeah.
And man, the conditions were not friendly. You guys did not make it out of the first cut. Everybody within 10 minutes, some within 10 seconds of that first cut. And then you guys went on and tacked on a nice, easy 10 plus extra miles after that. there was no finish line there. You guys enjoyed that process, and that's a big piece of what kept you going. Not only did you enjoy the company of each other, but you didn't hate what you're doing to the point where you needed to stop. And a lot of times when we experience burnout and these terrible things that make us quit, whether it's our job, a team, not even physically, literally quit, but that moment internally when you give up, there was a finish line there, wasn't there? There was something that shifted that, and you were not enjoying that process, and that's ultimately what led to that outcome. And so, falling in love with that process is huge. And again, there's strategies we named for that, but that's what I would want everyone to do, is just do what you love and love what you do, right? So,
100%, 100%. Seth, man, we appreciate you hopping on with us and sharing your thoughts and opinions for a little while. Best of luck with your thesis work. We hope that you crush it. If we can be a resource in any way, if you need case studies done, we can help out. Like, please do not hesitate to let us know, man. We're tied in. We're bonded by Florida State University, by Fleet Feet adjacently, but then also bonded by Men to Mind and putting good into the world, man. So again, we appreciate you hopping on. To our viewers, y'all, thanks for listening, checking us out. Hey, listen, the smoothie, it didn't make an appearance last episode. I forgot, all right? But we're back. We don't discriminate. So anybody that wants to sponsor us, please hit us up. Like, share, subscribe, tap in, and we'll catch y'all next episode. So thanks.
thank you.
Thank y'all very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And go Knowles.
And go Knowles, baby.
Who knows?